to the History, Health and Wellbeing channel. I'm your host, Paul. Today, as you can see, I'm joined by Mr. Ralph Ellis. And today we're going to talk about what we're calling this video, Woke Witticism and the 21st Century Inquisition. So, so lots to talk about. We're going to focus a lot on COVID and censorship and cancellations. And then we're going to take a look at some cancellations and censorship that's been occurring a lot closer to home. I'd like to start, Ralph. Have you seen Dr. John Campbell's recent video? I think it was last night on YouTube, where he showed a speech being made by Andrew Bridgen, the MP. I think he's a Conservative MP. He made a speech and he quoted lots of government data on the recent upsurge in excess deaths. Did you catch that one at all?
I did, and I think everybody should watch that because it's very pertinent to what we're going to talk about cancellation culture. Because do you know he's not a Conservative MP anymore?
I didn't know that, no.
They threw him out of the party. He no longer has the whip, as they say.
Right, okay, yeah.
So, because he had made these statements in the House, in Parliament, they chucked him out of the party because apparently you're not allowed to talk about certain things still, which is very pertinent to what we're going to talk about with Bedroom Barman and all of the goings on with my various interviews and various other things being thrown off channels. But yeah, he was thrown out of the Conservative Party for not mentioning tittle-tattle or rumour control. He was quoting from the ONS. This is the Organisation for National Statistics.
Yeah.
Let me drink some water. Hold on. So this is the establishment for data in the UK, and by all accounts, it's highly regarded. You know, they produce government data that is well regarded throughout the world, and that is what he was quoting about the jibby jabby and the virus. And for quoting it, he was thrown out of the Conservative Party. So he did this, I think it was about 2 weeks ago or whatever. That's when he got thrown out of the party. And now he came back yesterday, I think it was Friday, and gave another speech in Parliament. And, well, what do you know? The House wasn't very full. Quite often MPs are doing other things, you know, so it wasn't very full anyway. But all of the people in the House, as soon as he stood up, they all walked out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
can you imagine? They all walked out, and yet he had some very interesting things to tell us about, all from government data. So not rumor control, not conspiracy theory. And for some reason, members of Parliament don't want to know about it. And by extension, they don't want you to know about it, about safety of jibby jabbies that we're not even allowed to say the name of on these particular channels, because you will get demonetized or, you know, kicked off YouTube completely. So there is still censorship ongoing, even though some of that has subsided recently. It's still there. Before I let you in and we'll have a chat about this, the interesting thing that he came out with was on safety of jibby jabbies. And they've now got some data in. It's taken a while, far too long, to get some of the data on their safety. And for the healthy younger profile, I think it was from age 20 to age 45, something of that nature. So normal, healthy people. The problems we get with the jibby jabby And this data comes from the VERS system in America. They call it VERS or whatever. And in Britain, we have the yellow card system, very much the same. And doctors and so on write in and say, all of the patients that have had problems with the jibby jab, and it's specifically for jabs. It's not for other diseases and so on. And so they collect all of this data. And the rate of cases of severe problems with the jibby jabby for that age group, I think, was one in 1,000. So out of 1,000 people getting the jibby jabby, one person will have a serious
Adverse
event which will need hospitalization.
Mm.
So it's not just a sore arm or something of that nature. It's something's actually happened and you've now got to go and visit the hospital. That is unacceptable. And then they made a comparison with current rates for the actual virus, for Omicron, because obviously we're in the Omicron wave at present. And the number of people who have to go to hospital in this younger age group is remotely small. I mean, it's vanishingly small. And so what was the calculation? It was, oh gosh, let me try and think. Can you think of what I'm trying to say here? It's the relationship between
so many people would have to be vaccinated to prevent one hospitalization.
Yes, and it was a huge number, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was something like 250,000 people would have to be vaccinated to prevent one person.
And even in the age group, the most vulnerable people in their 70s with comorbidities, the calculation or the result of the calculation was still along the same lines,
Yeah, it didn't make sense in the higher age group and people with comorbidities and so on. It was 1-to-1. So your chance of getting a problem from the virus was the same as the chance of getting a problem from the jibby jabby.
Yeah.
So what's the point if it's a 1-to-1? But in the healthy and younger population, it was hugely skewed towards the danger being the actual jab rather than the virus. You would have to be absolutely crazy based on this data, which came from the ONS, the Office of National Statistics. You would have to be absolutely mad to get a booster, knowing the rate of problems with the actual jibby jabby. And yet recently they've still been pushing to push the age limit down into adolescents and infants. I think down to 6 years old or something.
I think they're still promoting booster jibby jabbies for 5 to 15-year-olds. Yeah.
And of course they had no data for that age range because nobody in that age range had ever got sick from the actual virus, sick enough to actually be in hospital and have a significant event, which is what the yellow card system is for. So they could not even give any data because there was no data to give. And so again, the problem from the jibby jabby was far in excess of anything that you would get from the actual virus itself. And the important thing, I suppose, from this is it comes down to why do we have censorship? Why is this censorship still ongoing, even now, even after the problems with the actual origins of the virus have now been exposed, and we now know that various people have been lying to us, including dear old Fauci in America and so on, but our government officials are just as guilty, I think, from the latest expose we had about government communications. I forget what they were using. They were using WhatsApp or something.
Yes.
And all of those communications were actually exposed by a reporter.
Mm.
And basically, our politicians, instead of dealing with the virus, they were playing politics. Oh, will this, doing this, will it make us look bad?
Mm.
Never mind about what it says about you as a politician.
Mm.
Just do the right thing. And yet they were not doing the right thing all the way through this particular pandemic. So
Mm.
that's come out very recently. And yet we still have this censorship. So that an MP who stands up and wants to actually tell us about the problems with the jibby jabby, all of the parliamentarians walk out of the House. Totally unacceptable. All of those MPs who walked out should be dismissed straight away.
Well, I don't think they were acting off their own back, Ralph. I would imagine that they've been instructed to do that, you know.
Yeah, but who's doing the instructing in that case?
Mm.
Is this politics? Is this big business? Because remember, Pfizer, if we're allowed to say that name, has made, I was going to say billions, but it's not billions, it's tens, hundreds of billions from this particular problem we've had with the virus. And John Campbell, well worth watching for people who haven't seen his videos. Dr. John Campbell has been doing videos all through the pandemic and as an independent voice, and one of the few lone voices that has been giving information that no one else will give. And yet he started off as a believer. Because he's done 45 years in the National Health Service. He believes in the National Health Service. So he believed that the people at the top of the service and within politics would be doing their utmost for the population. And yet, 6 months in, he started to waver. A year in, he was totally unconvinced that anything they were doing was correct. And now he's totally, is it red-pilled? I can't remember what color it is.
Yeah, red-pilled, yeah.
Red-pilled, yeah. He's totally red-pilled, and he's against virtually everything they say because he's been exposing, time and time again, he's been exposing that what they do is not correct, not following the science, illogical, and downright dangerous.
Yeah.
Like giving jibby jabbies to young people who are at no risk whatsoever from the actual virus.
Well, the whole idea behind that was to save grandma, wasn't it? Save grandma.
Yes, but it doesn't, because here's a little thing for people, which is interesting. For this pandemic, nobody has ever created a vaccine for this pandemic. Oh, I said the word I shouldn't say there. But no proper jibby jabby has ever been created for this virus. And people will say, no, that's not right. Of course they have. But no, because what they created does not conform to the standard definition of what a big V jibby jabby is.
Well, they've changed that definition, haven't they?
They changed it to make it fit. But originally, you see, it said, what did it say? A product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease. And of course, it did not. None of the jibby jabbies they've made have actually done that. And so they didn't actually create a proper, what would be called a big V, a jibby jabby. So as you said, they had to go in. This is from the CDC in America, the Center for Disease Control. They had to change the definition of what it was in order to make it sort of fit with what they were trying to do. So now the definition has changed to a preparation that is used to stimulate the body's immune response against diseases. That's not what it's supposed to be. You know, when I've had past vaccines, because I've had dozens of vaccines, you know, having traveled all over the world, you get a dozen of them every time you go, bit of this, bit of that, bit of yellow fever, whatever it happens to be, all sorts of jabs. But they're effective. You rely on them being effective. To a high degree, you'd be very disappointed if the effectiveness was not at least sort of 99%, 99.99% effective. And then it's a logical thing to do and to take, because it will protect you. But none of these have been remotely effective. In fact, there's some data has come out recently that was saying that the more boosters you actually take, the greater chance you have of actually getting the virus. So it's not actually protecting at all. So yeah, nobody has actually produced a vaccine for this virus because it doesn't conform with the definition for a vaccine.
Plus, now we have, Ralph, studies, I think, coming out of Canada, of all places, that are strongly advocating the use of vitamin D3 as
Yes.
a natural protection against these type of viruses. And I think they offer something like 33% extra protection against hospitalization with this particular virus. So, and this is still not being reported in the mainstream media as far as I can see, which is absolutely scandalous.
And I don't know if you again saw Dr. Campbell. He was reading out what he does. He goes through the papers. So it's not his views. He goes through the scientific papers, the medical papers that have been produced. And of course, a lot of them have been produced over the last couple of years. And he just reports on them. Things that politicians should be doing, scientists should be doing, medics should be doing, and telling us, the current data, what's coming out. But another thing with vitamin D, because I know you like vitamin D, he was reporting on vitamin D preventing Alzheimer's.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah,
40% reduction. Can you imagine?
Something 40%. To do with the atrophy of the dead cells in the brain or something like that.
Something. Yes, I wasn't following that closely exactly what the methodology was, but yes, it was preventing plaques or something within brain cells. And yet,
go on.
Well, and yet that wasn't promoted during the pandemic. So one of the big problems with cancel culture, which we're going to talk about, and we sort of are talking about, is the cancellation of things that are not what people want. So anything that goes against the agenda is cancelled, whether it's true or not, whether it's effective or not, whether we should have it or not. It's just cancelled because it goes against the agenda. And well, that's what they did with things like vitamin D. A lot of people were saying, hold on, vitamin D is the right class of vitamin to be helping here. So at the very least, we should be doing double-blind trials with it in order to see whether it does help or doesn't help. Or even if you can't do a double-blind, at least do a population study, which you could do quite easy.
I think the problem with these trials is they're extremely expensive to put on, and really only the pharmaceutical industry are able to afford to be able to do these trials.
Yes, but we were in a pandemic. The government is there to assist within a pandemic, and the government could have easily said, right, that hospital over there, you use vitamin D. That hospital over there, you use vitamin K2 or whatever it happens to do, or nothing at all as a control. And they could have, within 3 or 4 months, they could have had the results from that very quick and simple trial. Okay, it wouldn't be a total double-blind trial, but it would be quick and simple. And it could have been done back in March 2020. 3 years ago, sort of thing. And it wasn't. And you've got to ask yourself why. And why were the doctors who were calling for it cancelled? So we have this cancel culture again. And they're cancelling people who they think are wrong, who they think are going against the agenda. they're cancelling them, but time after time after time, these people appear to have been correct in what they were saying. That's the danger of the cancel culture. This is why we want a free range of ideas, because someone at YouTube, someone at Facebook is not the right person to be deciding whether you are correct or not in medical or climate or anything else, or history, come to that. So yeah, that is a big danger. And then of course we come to the therapeutics, and we have the same situation.
Yeah, I would also add actually that I strongly believe that vitamin C would have been very useful during this pandemic. Even something like, and you might laugh here, but even something like turmeric. I've been supplementing with vitamin D3 now for around 13 years. In all that time, personally, I've never had a cold in all that time. Prior to that, I used to get 1 or 2 a year. So vitamin C as well is very important. But turmeric, when I used to get colds, I used to go and get a takeaway curry because you would sweat out the symptoms of the cold, and it would be over a lot quickly. So even things like old natural medicines like turmeric, curcumin, all these things would have been very, very useful for people. But when people like myself were suggesting these ideas, vitamin D, vitamin C, iodine, turmeric, all these nutrients that are antiviral, antibacterial, that boost our immune systems, people like me were laughed at in 2020. Oh, that's rubbish, rah 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 rah. So it's a crazy world.
And again, they could have been easily tested within a hospital situation back in 2020. We were in a dangerous situation because at that time, remember, nobody quite knew the full effects of what this virus was going to do. It could have been much more dangerous. We didn't know that. And so they could have tried all of these different therapeutics, including, I'm still not sure if we're allowed to say its name. The
eye drug.
The eye drug, yeah. And the H drug.
Yes.
And the F drug, and so on. There were various things that were put out there as being potentially beneficial. And again, they're not antivirals necessarily, because that was not the problem. Nobody actually died from the virus. Here's another thing for you. They died from the effects of the virus, which was normally sort of inflammation of the lungs, inflammation of the heart, and so on. And so if you could keep the inflammation under control, then the person would have a much better chance of actually surviving and fighting off the actual virus naturally. And so a lot of these things were being promoted were actually anti-inflammatories. The F drug was an anti-inflammatory, and it gave people just a chance. So you didn't have to go on to these intubations and whatever else they were doing. If you could keep the inflammation under control, then you had a much higher chance of survival. And again, anyone who promoted those particular therapeutics was cancelled because YouTube knows better, Facebook knows better, and they're going to cancel you. And not only cancel, but some of them. So yeah, that was a big problem and symptomatic of the problems we've got with this idea that Big Brother knows best, and you must do what Big Brother says. Here's another one for you that's just come out. Second-hand jibby-jabbies. Now, that's an interesting one. They call it shedding.
Yes.
Which, of course, if you think about it, is going to happen because you can shed viruses. And so if you can shed a virus, well, why can't you shed a jibby-jabby? Because you can. Because what I don't know if people know what these jabs do, but they, with RNA, they promote cells to produce spike protein. And so this spike protein is expressed, and so the immune system will recognize it and it will attack it, and therefore the immune system. So remember, the jibby jabby is not actually curing you, it's making your immune system cure you by stimulating the immune system. So without wanting to go off topic, that is basically, that's natural immunity.
Mm.
But all you're doing is stimulating extra natural immunity. So of course natural immunity will have an effect and should be taken into account. But of course, none of the politicians allowed that to happen, and they were dismissing people from the armed forces and from the police, and from, even in Britain, there was something like, I don't know, 50,000 nurses were dismissed because they didn't have the jibby jabby, but a lot of them had already had the virus, and they were saying, look, naturally immune chaps, didn't count, they still got dismissed.
Yeah.
But yes, so the jab will allow you to express the spike protein, which then runs around your body and so on, and that's how you get immunity. But at the same time, you can express that spike protein. You can express it in your saliva, in your sweat perhaps, your nasal whatever it is comes out your nose. I forget what you would
Mucus,
actually call it.
Yeah.
But also mucus, I suppose. Mucus, that sounds like a good word, doesn't it? But also in your breath. So you don't only have the problem of perhaps spreading the virus through your breath, but you can spread spike proteins. And so these spike proteins can then be taken on by other people, and they can have a reaction to the spike protein, which has been expressed by someone else. So even when you haven't had the vaccine, you can have a reaction to it if you're living with someone who's had the vaccine, or you're very close to someone who has had the vaccine. So yeah, that's a new one that's only come out in the past couple of months. So that's another interesting little problem.
I've got some unvaccinated friends, and during the pandemic, they socialized with people that had been vaccinated, and they did afterwards experience some pretty nasty symptoms. So yeah, it does happen. It would appear that it does happen. Ralph, Dr. Robert R. Redfield, former director of the CDC, he recently stated in a House committee hearing that COVID-19 was most likely the result of a lab leak. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're coming back to a cancellation culture again, aren't we? The dangers of cancellation culture, because this guy was cancelled. Bearing in mind, of course, he was the director of the CDC. And yet, because he had the wrong opinions, Fauci and the little cabal around Fauci had him cancelled. They excluded him from all of the discussions they were having about what to do with. This is back in January, February 2020, right at the very beginning of this particular virus. And he got sidelined from all of the discussions. And so, yeah, that's dangerous. What did he do? This is when I'm trying to look up what the name of this particular paper was. Anyway, I'll see if I can find it. But anyway, Fauci, because the initial response of this chap, Redfield, the director of the CDC, and various other people, and quite a few senior medics, was to say that it was likely to be a lab leak. And Fauci, who was funding the particular lab in China through the NIH, I think it was, and the Eco Health Alliance,
Mhm.
money was flowing through these organizations into the particular lab in China. And so effectively, Fauci was actually funding this gain of function research in this particular lab. And one presumes that Fauci didn't want that information coming out.
Mhm.
And so he funded a paper which said that, no, that's highly unlikely. And so that was directly funded by Fauci. Now, he denied initially that he knew anything about it, but emails came out at a later date which said that, yes, he did. Well, he not only knew about it, he was actually the instigator of that particular paper, saying that the virus came from the wet market, and it couldn't have come at all from the particular lab. And because the director of the CDC did not agree with that, he was sidelined from this. He knew nothing about it until this paper came out, and of course, it was quoted within all of the media. And suddenly, anyone who was talking about lab leaks was cancelled. And then, of course, we got the letter from Peter Daszak,
Mm.
who was again a
Mm.
part of this. He was with the Eco Health Alliance, I think he was the director of that, who was funding this research in the lab in China.
Mm.
And Peter Daszak got this letter written, which was published in
The Lancet.
the Lancet,
Mm.
which said that a lab leak was a mere conspiracy. And anyone talking about lab leaks should be cancelled. Again, we come back to cancel culture. But that letter didn't last very long. It had to be withdrawn within within about 2 or 3 weeks, I think, from the Lancet. And that was the first, I think that was the first letter to the Lancet that had to be withdrawn in something like 200 years of publication. It was the first one that had to be withdrawn because it was basically wrong. And yet these were the techniques they were using in order to prevent anyone talking about lab leaks.
Mm.
And it was successful because no one did for 2 years. If we had mentioned it here, you'd have been off.
Mm.
YouTube would have cancelled you. Facebook would have cancelled you. Twitter would have cancelled you. All of the main media channels would have mocked you. You know, if you were someone of more import, you would have CNN and MSNBC and everyone else piling in to say you're a conspiracy theorist,
Mm.
which they did to many of these senior doctors, in order to prevent people talking about it. So when we come on to what we're going to talk about later, you can have coordinated campaigns by a cabal of people to prevent a particular piece of information being discussed and coming out. It's not a conspiracy to think that that can happen. It is demonstrably has happened in this particular case. Various aspects of this virus have been shut down. You are not allowed to talk about it. And even as you were saying there, the director of the CDC was not allowed to talk about it. He got cancelled as well.
Mm.
You know, if it can go that high up the chain, then what chance do you and I
Mm.
have about, you know, openly discussing these problems when the director of the CDC gets cancelled as well?
Mm.
Yeah, and that's doubly worrying when I knew from the information I had gleaned back in, this would have been March 2020, I knew that this had to be a lab leak, just based on the information I had found online from published papers and things of this nature. Because there were several things that were indicative of this having to be a lab leak. For instance, this virus was highly unusual. The first one ever, I think, to have jumped from an animal into a human, which is what they were saying, and then become so adapted to the human body. That's never happened before. That's why normally when they jump from animal to human, they do not replicate very fast, and normally the sort of virus peters out because it's not adapted to the human body. And this one was, from the get-go, it was completely adapted to humans, which is unusual, hugely unusual. The animal source, because they all said it came from animals, it came from bats, it came from pangolins. Well, sort of, yes, it came from bats, but this particular virus did not come from bats. The animal source has never been found, even now. Okay, it wasn't. This is 2 years. Is it 2 or 3 years ago? 3 years ago.
3 years now.
Yes, 3 years. Gosh, time rolls on, doesn't it? But even back in March 2020, they had been looking for this animal source. They'd been testing all of these animals, and they hadn't found an animal source. Even now, 3 years later, they still have not found an animal source. And more tellingly, they've given COVID-19 to bats, and it won't do anything to bats. It can't live in bats because it's not the same as the original virus that was in bats. And so we can tell that this cannot be a bat virus. And then the furin cleavage site, which is on the spike protein, there were several scientists way back in March 2020 who recognized this as being a man-made cleavage site. So this particular is a set of proteins on the end of the spike protein, which helps it lock on to a human cell. Because if the virus can't lock on to the surface of a human cell, it's not going to get in there, and it's not going to do any damage. And so it's not going to spread. But this furin cleavage site allowed it to lock on to the surface of a cell and therefore gain entry. Now, that particular combination of proteins was recognized as being something that had been invented in a laboratory many years previously. And so we knew, and a lot of people said, even back then, a lot of people said this is man-made because we've seen this particular series of proteins before. It's been made in a laboratory, and yet that was ignored. You weren't allowed to talk about it.
Which makes me very suspicious, Ralph. I'm sorry, but I am conspiratorial minded, and that makes me incredibly suspicious. You know, we're told there's too many people in the world, whether that's true or not. You know, is eugenics at play here? Is there eugenics at play? Is there something very sinister going on?
Well, that's the bigger question, isn't it? In fact, we've got two bigger questions. Why was it created? Why the cover-up? Was it accidental, or was it by design? There's a whole raft of questions that comes out of this. And why did people within the media back them up? I can't understand that. Surely the role of the media is to uncover any wrongdoing that's going on, either within the scientific profession or the politics or whatever. That they're supposed to uncover any particular problems, not run cover for them, which is what they were doing. So why was this created in the first place? Well, military applications aside, because that is one possible reason that someone was making something for military purposes. But I don't think that would be the case, because I don't think America would be doing it in China if it was for military purposes, because you've lost control of it immediately. It's in a different country. It's in China. What happened is gain of function had been banned by dear Mr. Trump, I think, banned it. So America wasn't allowed to do gain of function. And so it was parceled out to a third party in a different country where they could do gain of function. And it was being done at this particular lab in China. And it was being funded by Fauci and the NIH and EcoHealth Alliance. And the question is, why would you want to do this? Now, they're claiming that they wanted to make viruses to see what type of viruses could be made so they could make vaccines, to see how easy it was to make vaccines to combat that particular virus that they had just made. Could that have been the reason for it? Well, possibly, because I don't know if you have been watching Project Veritas. I don't know if you're a fan of Project Veritas.
Not recently, no. I'm aware of it, but I haven't seen them recently.
Well, biggest expose in the history of Project Veritas. And there's a problem there, so don't let me forget about it. There's more cancellation culture comes into that as well. Anyway, Project Veritas, for people who don't know, they send people out into businesses and try and identify corruption. And they normally do it by dating sites, by getting a man or a woman, more often a woman, to go and date someone in that particular company. And then take them out to various restaurants, get them drunk, and film them and see what happens, you see.
Yeah.
Well, they did this to a Pfizer executive.
Yes, I do remember that.
Yeah, it was a good one, wasn't it? And this Pfizer executive, who apparently they actually looked him up in the company directory, and he was a senior manager at Pfizer. And he's saying, well, what we're doing at Pfizer now is we're trying to create new viruses so that we can release them, and then we'll have a vaccine ready to go to combat that particular virus. And so we'll make billions out of this. And so he was admitting, and this is a senior Pfizer executive, he was admitting that they might be wanting to create a virus in order to make money from it for financial benefit. Here's a virus. Look, we're going to release this on the world because now we've got a vaccine for that. And we're going to make, what were they charging? They were charging $25 a pop, I think, for the COVID jibby jabby. Whereas AstraZeneca, whatever people think about Astra and their particular jibby jabby, they were only charging £2.50. And Pfizer were charging something like $25. So there you go. Anyway, so that was the big expose that, yes, you could have a company who was so degenerate that they would wanting to create viruses for financial benefit. Project Veritas exposed this, and O'Keefe, what's his first name? I can't remember what his first name is. James, I think. James O'Keefe was the guy who organizes this. He set up Project Veritas himself. It was his own company. So this is the biggest scoop he's ever had in 10 years with Project Veritas. 2 weeks after the scoop, he gets kicked out of his own company. The board of directors kicked him out of the company. He's just made the biggest scoop in the history of the company, which would probably bring in, because it's a subscription service, people donate money because they want some of these hidden truths to come out. That's where they get their funding from. That particular expose would probably bring in $50 to $100 million through the various donors. And what does the company do? They kick O'Keefe out of the company. And that was hugely suspicious. I mean, why on earth would you want to do that? Unless perhaps someone was saying, well, actually, we don't like this particular expose of Pfizer, and maybe we don't like O'Keefe, the guy who actually did it. And so they cancelled him. This is cancel culture at in play. This is what we're experiencing
Mm.
within theology and mythicism.
Mm.
It's cancel culture in play.
Yeah.
And nobody has said why O'Keefe was really cancelled if there was a financial transaction there. Nobody knows. Nobody's talking about it. O'Keefe doesn't know. What he's gone and done, of course, is the only thing he can do, is he's gone off and started another company. So he started a Project Veritas Mark II, which I think is called OMG. And so he's going to continue because the whole company revolved around this one person. He was the life and soul of that particular company from its very beginning. And so the only thing he can do now is start a new company, which is what he's done. But it's very alarming that someone who is doing so much good in exposing not just this one, he's done many stings on many companies, normally about financial sort of impropriety, various illegal dealings in companies and things of that nature. That's the mainstay of the sort of work he does. Some of it has been political. He's trapped a few politicians into saying things they shouldn't have said. But so, yes, here's a person that would generate a large opposition. And then he gets cancelled. Cancel culture at its finest. Pick out the person who is really objectionable to these people, nefarious people, and cancel them.
I think the only positive thing that's happened with all this, Ralph, is the average person in the street is now asking questions, which is a good thing, because there is so much suspicion here. I'd just like to make a couple of points before we move on. With regards to the MP, Andrew Bridgen, I think he said in his speech that the yellow card reporting system was being cancelled by the government.
Was it?
I think so. I won't say that's a definite. I'm sure I heard him say it, so I'll look into that after we finish recording today, but I'm pretty sure that's what he said, which again should create an enormous amount of suspicion.
Yeah. Well, again, it's cancel culture. Okay, it's not a person, it's an organization and a product.
Yeah.
But that is the height of cancel culture again. Here we have a system that's giving results that go against the agenda, and so you cancel it.
Yeah.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, I'll have to check that, but I'm sure I heard him. And the other thing I'd like to address is the mainstream media has provided us with some answers with regards to the dramatic upsurge in excess deaths. Apparently, heart attacks and strokes can now be caused by climate change. They can be caused by hot weather, cold weather. They can be caused by the clocks going forward. That was one I read the other day. Exercising in the gym. Now, ladies, if you're watching, washing your hair while menstruating can cause heart attacks. And that was in a mainstream article. And this is my personal favourite. Living in the countryside, but particularly if you're a black man.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I did hear that.
They will drag colour into it. Give them any excuse whatsoever, and they will drag colour into it. But we're all racist, but they will drag colour into every single news story. So
yes,
absolutely insane.
Well, that they said this about Trump way back in 2020. He said the virus came from China, and they said that's racist.
Yeah.
No, it did come from China. Whether you believe it was wet market or whether you believe it was laboratory, it came from China. Yeah. Oh no, that's racist.
You can watch.
Trump's a racist.
There's thousands of videos online of social justice warriors being interviewed during the Trump presidency, and they're asked, "Why don't you like Trump?" Because he's a racist. Why is he a racist? And that's the response you get to that one. Who was it that said the bigger the lie, or the more you repeat the lie, the more people will believe it? I think it might have been Lenin or someone like that, but
Yes.
or possibly somebody in the German party, not Nazi party. But apparently that's very true, judging by the last 2 or 3
I
years.
think it was Goebbels, but there we go.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, well done. Yeah. So absolutely. Keep your comments coming, people, by the way, and please
Shall
do
I
ask. Go on,
shall I upset everyone on the stream?
if you must.
Because I've had this a lot in this particular discussion with cancel culture, because, you know, I've been cancelled, Dr. Price has been cancelled. We've been talking about cancel culture. And a lot of people have come on and said exactly the same as you, and said, well, I hate Trump because Trump's a racist, and Trump didn't do anything in his 4 years. And I said, well, sorry. Whether you like him or not, he did a lot of things. So I'm going to upset everybody now and give a list of what I think he might have done that might have been positive. He renegotiated NAFTA. So now we've got the USMCA, which is the economic deal with the rest of North America. And apparently that is well regarded within the economic community as being actually a very good deal. He placed import duties on China to reduce dependency on China, to actually give industry in America a chance to compete with cheapo China. And note that despite all of the criticism from the Democrats, those tariffs are still there. they haven't been taken away yet. He forged peace relations with North Korea. He forged a peace agreement between Israel and the UAE and with Bahrain, known as the Abraham Accords. He forced Germany to increase their spending on NATO because that was just being run by America and no one else was contributing. He mocked Germany for their dependence on Russian gas. And they laughed at him. Yes. How did that work out, Germany? And it was just as well he did, in a way, because, well, the other thing is he stopped Nord Stream 2. He stopped it in its tracks back in 2019. So he forced Germany back in 2019 to start looking at alternative gas supplies in case Nord Stream 2 never came back. Because if he had won the election in 2022, wherever it was, 2020, then Germany would not have been able to use Nord Stream 2. Of course, Biden opened it back up again. So they had to look for other sources of gas. So they had 2 years warning before all of the shenanigans going on in Ukraine that they might need other gas resources. And so if they hadn't have done that, Germany would have been really stuffed. And I haven't seen any thanks to Trump for stimulating them to get alternative gas supplies back in 2019, which is what he did. He made the Supreme Court more balanced. Well, some people might not like that, but anyway, it's more balanced now. He founded the Space Force. He slashed corporation tax. Personally, I think that's a good idea. I think companies are the mainstay of production and employment. And so you want companies that are rich and successful so they can innovate and employ more people and pay better wages and things of that nature. So I'm not a great fan of corporation tax, but there we go. That's open to discussion, you might say. He defeated ISIS when everyone said it would not be possible. He moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. And remember the kerfuffle over that. You can't do that. It's racist. And you're going to create a war in Israel. There will be hostilities immediately. And of course, nothing happened. And remember, this wasn't a Trumpism. This particular proposal had been proposed, I think it was 40 years ago or more. So it had been, as it were, on the statute books for some 40 or 50 years that the embassy would be moved to Jerusalem. But nobody had the balls to actually do it. and sign it into law. And so he said, well, I'll sign it into law. Here it goes. And of course, nothing happened. He had the lowest unemployment for 50 years, the lowest black unemployment ever in the history of America. He built the border wall to prevent fentanyl in immigration. They're not discussing it very much at present, but fentanyl is the biggest killer in America at present.
It's a massive
I think
problem.
it's running at about 60,000 deaths a year from fentanyl, which is all coming across the southern border.
Ralph,
no one is mentioning it.
have you seen the footage of there are, I suppose, for want of a better word, there are ghettos in parts of America like San Francisco, parts of California, New York, where you literally see these poor people standing around in the street, just in a completely kind of comatose trance or whatever on this drug, which is legal, and it's just, what on earth is going on? It's very sad.
If that had been anything else that's killing 50,000, 60,000 people a year, in fact, that's 2021 data. We don't even have 2022 yet. It's got worse since then.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be 50, 60,000. It's going to be 100,000 when we get the data for 2022. If anything else was killing 100,000 Americans a year, there would be uproar. That every politician would be trying to do their bit to sort it out, like they were trying to do with COVID, although not very successfully. They would have, an emergency situation on hand. And yet they don't care about it because it's killing the wrong people, as it were. It's mainly sort of rural America that has this fentanyl problem. And of course, the Democrats don't care about rural America. That's just flyover country. And so they don't care about that.
But it would also seem to be a problem in some kind of like poor areas in major cities in America as well.
Yes.
And you would think that the Democrats would care about these people and would do something.
Well, they obviously don't care about them. Otherwise, they wouldn't allow them to sit and fester in their little, as you say, ghettos. And we had dear old, who was the leader of the House, the lady? Anyway, they were complaining about the number of immigrants coming over the border and the number of people in these ghettos in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and so on. And she said, well, we know all about them. We're feeding them. We're feeding them. And you think, they're not animals in a zoo, for goodness sake. We're not talking about zoo animals here. We're feeding them. Completely the wrong attitude. You want to solve the situation. You don't want to just be feeding them in cages. Who was the leader of the House? Anyway, she said that. The old lady that used to be leader of the House until recently. So big problems in America that are not being addressed for some reason. They want to talk about other things instead. They want to talk about transitioning men into women and various things like that. What else did Trump do? He closed the border with China back in February 2020.
Yes.
And everyone said that was racist. You can't do that. That's racist. But it was the best thing that was ever done. It stemmed the flow. Yeah. Absolutely crazy that they would criticize him for that. He correctly identified that the virus came from a laboratory in China. Nancy Pelosi, there we go. We've just had it in the chat. Yes. That was the lady who was feeding the zoo animals in downtown Los Angeles. There we go. He correctly identified COVID as coming from the Wuhan lab, if we're allowed to mention that name, which nobody would do. And yet Trump, as an independent-minded person, actually said, yes, based on the information, we think it came from there. So there we go. That's going to upset a load of people, but there we go.
probably. I would like to believe in Donald Trump, and I really did enjoy his rhetoric during his original campaign trail. I thought putting Americans first. What a great idea if you're an American, What's bad about that? Um, but at the end of the day, Ralph, he did warp, to use his own terminology, he warped, we're going to use warp speed to get these vaccines in. And these
Yes.
vaccines, he said, were one of the greatest achievements of mankind. So that has apparently,
Well,
looks like it's backfired.
yes. But as a politician, of course, that was perfectly correct, because he was not a party to the inner workings of what was going on. Nobody from these particular pharmaceutical companies was telling the politicians that actually their viruses were not half as good as they expected. When they were first released, remember, they were saying 98% effective. You remember the claims.
Yeah, yeah.
And then as time went on, the claims went down. Well, you see, it's sort of like 85%. Well, maybe it's 78%. Well, perhaps it's only 60%. And so the feedback, of course, that any politicians were getting from these pharmaceutical laboratories was completely wrong. It's very difficult to make up policy, national policy, when the medics are actually lying to you, which they were from day one. With Peter Daszak and Fauci and all of the other people, the NIH, EcoHealth Alliance, they were all lying to the politicians. And the very people who should have found out about that, because I knew about most of this just by reading the web and so on, the mainstream media were not identifying the problems with what was being said and putting it on headline news so that the politicians would know about it. Because politicians are not going to do what you and I do and scan the web for alternative views. They're just going to read the mainstream media. But if the mainstream media remains quiet, then how are they going to know? This is how the media can change politics, by what they concentrate on and what they delete.
Well, they're conditioned or brain trained to think that any alternative information is conspiracy theory. That's just the way the world is right now.
Well, no, it's deeper and worse than that. If you remember that there was various things that it was obvious that they were lying about, like they were lying about the laboratory in China, which anyone would have known that it was a distinct possibility, and yet they lied about that. The eye drug that we're not allowed to talk about, that was taken by Joe Rogan, and every media outlet in the whole of America came out at the same time and said that he was irresponsible for taking horse dewormer. Now, they knew that was a lie. A 6-year-old would know that that was a lie. And yet they deliberately lied to the whole of the American population that this particular therapeutic was horse dewormer.
Plus the original footage of Joe Rogan coming out and saying, "This is how I treated myself," is very, very different to the CNN footage that they put on. They gave him a different color. They made him look like Morph.
Yes, they did. Yes, they changed the color, color profile. What they didn't want, of course, because it was going against the agenda, is Joe Rogan, in concert with a very respected doctor. Remember, Joe Rogan is a multimillionaire. He's not short of a cent or two. His doctor gave him a cocktail of things to take, including the eye drug and various other things, monoclonal antibodies as well. And Joe Rogan got better in 3 days. They didn't want that information coming out because it went hugely against the agenda.
He took a horse drug.
He took a horse drug. And all of the media repeated that to the whole of the American population, knowing it was a lie. Now, that's not just the media being stupid, like most of the Daily Mail reporters are only children and they wouldn't know any better. That was beyond them being stupid. That was deliberately deceiving the public to suit some sort of agenda in order to cancel Joe Rogan, which is effectively what they tried to do. They tried to cancel him. Through this, they were saying that, this is a disreputable person, therefore he shouldn't be in charge of a very successful chat room video product, and so he should be cancelled. We can't have these dangerous people talking to the public.
Yeah, they took him off YouTube.
They were trying to get rid of him.
Yeah.
They took him off YouTube completely. He had to go over to Spotify, I think he went over to. That is cancel culture at play. It's dangerous, but it's more than dangerous. It's coordinated. And who is coordinating this? That every single American TV channel, apart from Fox, I think it was, didn't, all came out with the same script at the same time. That was coordinated. So who is coordinating this? And likewise, we were talking about Fauci and so on. Who was coordinating the fact that you weren't allowed to talk about Chinese labs? Now, we know that Fauci was organizing this because he didn't want anyone talking about Chinese labs. But who then was telling the media not to mention Chinese labs? I don't think Fauci would have that ability. He's not that powerful. He couldn't go around all of the newsrooms in the whole of America and say, don't you dare talk about Chinese labs. Someone else must have been coordinating that cancellation of that particular piece of news, because all of the media outlets in America ran with it. And anyone that didn't was shouted down and said to be a conspiracy theorist, and people were trying to cancel them.
Well, so many of these agencies have worked in lockstep, haven't they? Throughout the whole pandemic, So who knows? Ralph, sorry to interrupt, but I don't know how I'm appearing to you at the moment, but it looks as though I've seen the light.
Yes.
I've read your 4-part trilogy on Jesus, you see. So I'm just going to shut a door. Won't be a second.
Yeah, you're
a bit too illuminated. Is that any better? Yeah,
that is much better. Yes, you were. Half of your face was cancelled out, so we only got half of it.
CNN are at work.
Half a cancellation.
Yeah. Should we move on now to
cancelling
and censorship? That's a little bit closer to home, shall we say? So, the censorship and cancelling of Dr. Price, and yourself, and the Odessa Theory. So Ralph, why are there YouTubers out there obsessively trying to delete you and your Odessa Theory? Who benefits from this, and who's pulling the strings?
Yeah, this is interesting. For people who don't know what's happened, Dr. Price was kicked off Myth Vision, I think it was called, some time ago, because of his political views. I think that's a bit of an excuse myself, but cancellation always needs an excuse, and that was the excuse used. And so Dr. Price then went to Bedroom Barman, who runs the Histrionics Valley channel, and started talking on that channel instead. And then very recently, he was cancelled. But after, and I think you pointed this out to me because I wasn't sure about this, Bedroom Barman had actually set up a GoFundMe for him. So the guy in charge of this channel had set up this GoFundMe to get money for Dr. Price because he was short of money, and they raised $3,000 for him. So this was only like, there it is, GoFundMe, donate to Dr. Robert M. Price. There we go. This was only like about 2 or 3 weeks ago. and it was set up by the guy who just cancelled him. And you've got to think, well, hold on, that's a bit odd. Doubly odd because he can't use the excuse that he doesn't like his political views. Dr. Price is a Republican, as is half of America. So let's not hold that against him. Half of America happens to be Republican. But when Price was kicked off the Myth Vision channel, Bedroom Barman called me to say that actually he didn't mind Price's political views because he was a Republican himself and he agreed with everything Price had been saying, which was just, standard Republican talking points. There's nothing particularly strange. So Barman could not use the excuse that he didn't like his political views because he had already publicly said that he didn't mind those views. So what does he do? He says, oh, well, because Price had printed 2 of my articles in his journal, and these articles were totally beyond reproach, they were from the very gutters of academia, that Price had to either delete them from his journal or he would be cancelled. And so Price, I'm very glad to say, stood up to this bullying, which is what it is, and said, no, I'm not going to delete those particular articles. You can get stuffed. And so Bedroom Barman cancelled him and deleted all of his previous videos he had done with Price, which was like a third of his output had been videos with Price. And if you look at the stats, he lost a third of his viewers, as it were. If you look at the statistics, all disappeared within 2 or 3 days. And you've got to ask again, with this cancellation culture business, why on earth would he do that? It wasn't the political views, because we've already seen that he agreed with his views. Why change his mind? 2 weeks before, he was supporting him and doing a GoFundMe, and then 2 weeks later, he's cancelling him, and then using me as an excuse in order to cancel Price, in order to drive a wedge between me and Price, obviously, and using the excuse of my articles on the Journal of Higher Criticism, which is a great journal, actually. If anyone wants to look it up, it's on Amazon. My only criticism of that particular journal is it doesn't have an index. Please, Robert, can you get an index? An index of contents so I can scan through and look up to see which articles I want to actually look at. So it's very difficult to find the particular articles. Anyway, the article I wrote, if anyone wants to look at it, is on Amazon. You can buy it from there. Is issue 17, number 2, I think it is. Issue 17, number 2. And it was an article on the Hakok mosaic, the Hakok Alexander mosaic, or the elephant mosaic. And it was a very interesting article. It wasn't controversial, controversial. It was a little bit controversial because I'm saying something different to standard academia, but it was well argued. It's a very interesting article. There is no way in the world that article comes from the sewers or the gutters of academia. So this was just an excuse. Cancel culture needs an excuse. The excuse is often racism. Mind you, we got that as well, didn't we? we got a bit of that as well. It needs excuses, and this was the excuse that they got, or used, should I say. And then it got nasty because what did Bedroom Barman said? I was a filthy man.
Yeah, I saw that.
But now we're going beyond the realms of theological dispute or even academic dispute.
Personal attacks, yeah.
Whatever you think about my research, that does not make me a filthy man. Whether you think I'm right or wrong in my various theories I've put out, you might disagree with them. A lot of people would disagree with them. It would be nicer if people refute my ideas with actual data, which I don't get a lot of. I get a lot of people saying, that's rubbish. Why is that rubbish? Well, it just is. It's rubbish. Why is it rubbish? And nobody will give me an answer. All of these critics that keep coming out of the woodwork, they're very happy with the abuse. That comes out straight away. But they have no data, no logic, no facts, no reason, no rationale, no argument.
Mm.
Very few of them actually trying to address the problem. Problem. It's not a problem for me. It's a problem if you're a fundamentalist Christian, maybe. The problem with my various theories. And it's interesting that dear old Barman never seems to complain about my other theories. So he doesn't complain about the Hyksos. He doesn't make a big issue about David and Solomon. He doesn't make a big issue about my ideas of Jacob. Jacob and Joseph. He doesn't make much of a problem with even with Saul and Josephus. He doesn't really make a big issue. He disagrees with it, but he doesn't make a big issue about Saul and Josephus. His big problem is always Odessa. It's the only thing he talks about is Odessa. You've muted yourself there, Paul.
I completely agree with what you're saying. I have, however, heard him say on one occasion that you're a climate change denier. He's used that one before, and there was something else as well. Oh, I think possibly because of the 2001 Space Odyssey theory. That one was once ridiculed on one of his live streams with the usual suspects. But
yes,
yeah,
well, and he's disagreed with. I said that Star Wars was based on the Jewish revolt.
yes, that's right. Yeah,
But there was, with all of these things, there was good reason for saying so. A lot of the imagery they used within Star Wars was very pertinent to the Jewish revolt.
and what about
And
the? Sorry to interrupt, Ralph. But what about the? I'm trying to think of the name of it. The moon, one of Saturn's moons, it looks identical to the Death Star in the Star Wars movies.
Oh, okay. I don't mention that. No, so that's not one of mine. So I'll have to look at that.
But you should do, because it's identical. Literally, it's a giveaway.
Saturn's moons. So that's
Kronos, is it? Is it Kronos? Something like that.
Dione Rhea. No. Enceladus Tethys, Dione Rhea. Titan, Hyperion, Iapetus, I think. There we go. There's the moons of Saturn. So, yeah, I don't mention that one. So I don't know if he's mentioned that at all. But things like the climate change, he knows nothing about climate change, apart from what he gets from CNN, perhaps, or whatever. So again, he's arguing from a position of ignorance because he knows nothing about the subject whatsoever. He knows less than Greta. Which is, saying something. Those are the things that are bandied around as excuses. They're not reasons, they're excuses. Oh, Ellis is, they called me a racist. Yeah, thanks very much. That was based on a piece of text, which I have no idea where it came from, but it wasn't written by me. This was something when the Gormless Gnostic did a hit piece against me,
By the way,
video.
Sorry, I've heard recently he's still combing the Mediterranean coastline in searching for Odessa. He's still out there as we speak.
Yes. Apparently Odessa is on the Mediterranean coastline. Yes. Dear old Gormless Gnostic. No wonder he is the Gormless one. But apparently this information that he put out in his hit piece video was all researched by Bedroom Barman. It wasn't his information at all. It came from Barman. He said so. And one of these pieces was that I'm a racist because I wrote this particular piece about black education. It wasn't my text at all. I've got no idea where this one came from. But this is what they do in cancel culture. They find something, they attribute it to you, they make it up perhaps, who knows, and then they say, look, here we go, cancel him, he's racist because he wrote this. No, I didn't. So yeah, that was one of the complaints. And then he said I was misogynist. And that goes back to this aviation business. We've talked about this before, so I won't go into any great detail. But I made one of my posts in my Facebook site, which was talking about aviation safety and the fact that during COVID, we were carrying highly flammable liquids on the flight deck, i.e. hand cleansers, which, if you know anything about these ethanol hand cleansers, they're normally about 80% ethanol. It's highly flammable.
Yeah.
And 3 aircraft have burst into flames, including one of the aircraft that I used to fly. So, and what I was saying, of course, is that these flammable liquids should be banned from the flight deck. Now, they happen to be used for 3 particular requirements. One is ritual hand washing, if you go to the East. One is for COVID, which is what I was complaining about, because this was the COVID era, and we were carrying these huge, great bottles of flammable liquid on the flight deck. And the other is perfumes. And so he said I was misogynist because I said that women can't wear perfume. We're talking about a very specific application here, like don't wear it like in the flight deck when you've got 100% oxygen, and that 100% oxygen is tested before every flight. And we've already had 3 major incidents which have killed, I think 72 people were killed by these flight deck fires, which were set off by flammable liquids on the flight deck. And I know about this because I used to fly the aircraft that burst into flames. So who do we believe? Bedroom Barman and the Gormless Gnostic, who have never been in a flight deck, a commercial aircraft flight deck in their life? Or do you believe me, who is a commercial airline captain with 20,000 hours of flying experience?
Well, this is what, sorry, Ralph, this is what people need to understand. If I just go back to the comment I made earlier about what do you call him? Gormless Gnostic.
The Gormless Gnostic, yes.
On the stream where he tried to convince you that Odessa was on the coast, that actual stream, he asked you to come on to talk specifically about some Arthurian book. He asked you to read it. He said, we'd like to do a video with you on this. And then once he started streaming, he never brought it up, not once. It was all just an attack on your Odessa theory. I mean, these are the underhanded sort of tactics that they're employing. And it's just people need to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah, this was pure cancel culture again. He got me onto the video under false pretenses. And in fact, perhaps we ought to do this talk because it was quite an interesting book. I did all this research into this particular book from a Arthurian author that I'd never read before. And it was all very interesting. And so I spent, 3 or 4 days reading this book and building up a few arguments about this particular book. And then, of course, as you say, he never asked any questions on that book whatsoever, and went in against the Odessa theory with venom, I think you might say. It wasn't a discussion. This was pure hatred and venom that he wanted to cancel it. And of course, he didn't know enough about the subject, and so he was floundering a little bit here and floundering there because he didn't know the answers that I had were very good answers. And then he goes on this expedition trying to find Odessa, as you were talking about. You go, why does this idiot think that he knows where Odessa is, when someone who has written a 600-page book on Odessa and who used to live in that country for 6 years? I don't know where Odessa is, but he does. And he's sitting there trying to find Odessa, as you say, on the Mediterranean coast.
If
What
nothing else,
planet is this guy on?
if nothing else, Ralph, that was comedy gold. That was a beautiful moment for anyone that was watching that was a follower of Ralph. It was like, oh, that's just beautiful.
Yeah, but why would you do that? Why would you think you know more than someone who has written a 600-page on that particular city? Absolutely crazy.
Maybe because they consider themselves part of the academic circle, you know, and us academics know much better.
Yeah, well, that's possible. And the other question, of course, is why would you want to do it? If you disagree with something, I can imagine that you would want a discussion about it and you would want to talk about it. But why would you want to attack it with venom? That rather suggests that this is there's an ulterior motivation here. Because this particular, the Gormlist Gnostic knows nothing about Odessa. Why would he suddenly be so anti-Odessa? It's as if he was promoted into that position by someone else. And so the question is, are there shadowy hands behind the scenes who are guiding this particular hatred?
Well, my feeling has always been that it's academic pressure on these people. That's why they're behaving the way they are. That's my personal feeling. You probably know much better than I do, but that's the impression I've always had.
Yes, academic, but maybe religious as well. Maybe this is theological, because there were several names mentioned. I won't mention them here because, of course, we're on YouTube. But there were several names of academics, but not just academics, of course. These are theologians. These are religious people who were behind the cancellation of Dr. Price on Myth Vision when he got kicked off Myth Vision. And there were a couple of names, 2 or 3 names that came up. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat, and the chat is saying, well, Odessa is on the coast of Crimea. No, sorry, we're not talking about Odessa. We're talking about Edessa with an E, not an O. It's a different place entirely, but there we go. Anyway, a couple of names came up who were behind the cancellation of Dr. Price, and this looked as if this was theological, not academic. And one of these guys was associated with, let's see if I can look this up. I should have. Here. So, no, I didn't hold it. Anyway, I'll look it up on my iPad while I'm talking. One of these guys was associated with a website and an organization who sponsors woke people into theology and history. And it is the most woke organization you could possibly imagine. It's called the HAPS Fund, HAPS Fund. And they were a major supporter of HAPS. And now, if you were looking for an organization who might be anti Dr. Price with all of his reevaluations of the New Testament, and if you were looking for someone who might be against the Odessa Theory, which says that the gospel story is connected with the royal family of Odessa, there would be no better organization than the HAPS Fund. So perhaps there is an organization like that who is anti this particular piece of research, because this piece of research, so what I'm saying here is that the cancellation of Dr. Price is just a side issue, perhaps, in this particular respect, because the cancellation of Dr. Price was to throw a wedge between myself and Dr. Price. Either you cancel Ellis or you're going to get cancelled yourself.
Mm.
And so it's quite possible that this move by Bedroom Barman to cancel Dr. Price was actually a way of defeating the Odessa theory, because that's what the Gormless Gnostic was against. He was against the Odessa theory. So is Barman, for no good reason. So was Myth Vision, for no particular good reason. They don't like the Odessa theory. Not, I believe, because it's a bad theory, because there's a lot of information. Even if you don't believe it, there's a lot of information that backs it up. I wrote a 600-page book about it, for goodness sake.
I think it's an excellent theory, Ralph. But the thing that makes me wonder about all this is the fact that, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, before this all started to really build, a certain person over at History Valley Channel, his own research was very, very close to your own on this subject.
Yes.
Yes. And then all of a sudden, it just changes like that, which I thought was very odd.
Yes. And for the followers of the Histrionics Valley channel and Bedroom Barman, why does anyone believe what this guy says? Or what Myth Vision says, or what the Gormless Gnostic says? I mean, both of those are previously fundamentalist Christians who were taken in with Christian fundamentalism. So they're not the brightest, they're not the sharpest tools in the box, you might say. And yet they are now professing that they know everything about New Testament history and historiography. Likewise with Bedroom Barman, he's being held up by some people as being an authority. And therefore, you should take what he says as being true. But who is Bedroom Barman? What has he ever done? Name the books that he's written. Name the theory that he actually exposes. Because I've got no idea what his ideas are anymore. As you say, he's changed his ideas completely.
Mm.
All of his early videos were, what did he call them? Sounds likes. This name sounds like that name, so therefore that must be the same person. And you go, well, you've just connected 5 random people for no apparent reason. I've got no idea why you're connecting these people. It doesn't seem to make any theological or historical sense. No idea what you're doing whatsoever with your research into the Gospels. And then he came out with all sorts of absolute crap, I have to say. One of them was that because we were looking into the Odessa theory, he said that Antiochus, no, Artaxerxes of Odessa, Artaxerxes of Odessa sounds like Matthias, and therefore they must be the same person. What? Artaxerxes and Matthias, the same person? He didn't even know that Artaxerxes is the generic name for the Parthian kings. It's Arsaces, but it's a corruption of it because they had a different accent down in Armenia and down in Odessa, and so they called him Artaxerxes. It's the standard name for the Parthian princes and the Parthian kings. Nothing to do with Matthias. So I pointed this out on this particular video. And so what does he do? He deleted the video. So that one's gone now. You can't see that one anymore. But that was the level of expertise we had from Bedroom Barman. Nothing he said made any real sense. Nothing he ever said could be formulated into a story. Remember, that's where the name history comes from. History comes from the Greek, meaning a story. And that's what we try to do with history. We're trying to formulate a story that explains history. And so if your history is not actually explaining what was happening in the ancient past, well, you don't really have much of a research project. You probably don't know very much at all. And I've got no idea what his ideas are anymore. He was vaguely Roman provenance, and saying that, you know, Atwill's work was okay, if I remember correctly. And then he says that my work is rubbish, but my Odessa theory is pure Roman provenance. It is Roman provenance writ large. It is Atwill's theory explaining who the characters are, rather than just saying, oh, well, it was a story that was made up by Josephus Flavius and it was made up for Titus and it was a completely fictional story. I'm saying, hold on, same idea, but now I can show you the characters involved. The characters involved were the Odessan royal family. So, yeah, all of these followers of Bedroom Barman, on what basis do you agree with someone like Bedroom Barman? On what authority is this guy to say anything at all? Better still to read the books yourself and see if you think they make sense.
Well,
because we come back, I see you wanting to come in there, but we come back to the same old problem I get all the time on these video comments, is the detractors and the critics, they just say rubbish. Ellis is rubbish. The Odessa Theory, rubbish. Okay, tell us why. What's your explanation? What do you disagree with? And they never answer. They never do.
Yeah. I might be about to make myself unpopular with some people here, but I actually feel a bit sorry for Jacob. I've always felt like this. I would like to point out he's only about, what, 23, 24? He's quite young. I think he does have a fair amount of knowledge when it comes to the Bible. And I just think he's mixed in with the wrong crowd, if you like. You know, I think that's what's happened to him. He's had his head turned. And it's a shame, really. But that's just my thoughts on Jacob.
Yeah, but he's not just an innocent character who's been carried along by other personalities, because he's been instigating this. He's been calling yourself, hasn't he, on many occasions?
Up until about a year ago, yeah, we did have a lot of correspondence, and he said to me that a lot of his beliefs in this subject corresponded with yours up to a point. And I don't know. I mean, I can only speculate now. I know that at one point he was looking at Monobazus as the historical Jesus, which I believe is what you do. Monobazus of
pretty much
Odessa. Yeah. So
yes.
At one point he was pretty much in line with yourself. And as I say, I think whether it's a case of, you know, you're going to ruin your career if you carry on down this line following this independent researcher, you know, you need to come in line with academia and what we're teaching. So, you know, who knows?
Yeah, but he's not academia, is he?
Yeah.
I mean, what he says is
not yet, but he is. I think he is taking some sort of qualification in that sort of area.
But he's still not espousing standard academic theories about the New Testament. He is very much out on his own. So it's very difficult, therefore, to criticize someone else who's out on their own as well. But he was trying to drive a wedge between yourself and me, wasn't he?
Pretty much. I mean, I think he's treated a lot of people like that. You know, if you're going to carry on, you know, supporting Ralph's theory, or if you carry on having Ralph on your channel, that's it. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going to block you, which is what he did. He did. And I think he blocked me on 2 or 3 occasions because I refused to cave in, you know. So.
But other people, of course, have not. And so we get the likes of Elliot Saxton, who runs the Tired Old History video channel. And he caved in. And he made a video, an apology video, apologizing to Bedroom Barman for actually supporting me and having me on his channel. And so again, he's been interfering by calling up this person, and he had a 5-hour chat with him. And this guy caved in, and you've got to think, well, why? What is Bedroom Barman to this other independent video channel maker that he would want to apologize? Apologize for what, for goodness sake? It's got nothing to do with Bedroom Barman, whether I'm on his channel or not. Well, it doesn't matter if he agrees with my theories or not. It's, it's an interesting topic to discuss. It's got nothing to do with Bedroom Barman. What's he complaining about? And yet this guy caved in and deleted me from his channel. Now, is that simply because Bedroom Barman was trying to cancel me, or was there someone else behind the scenes? Was there a hidden hand that was assisting him? Did he have something up his sleeve that he could use as leverage? I mean, what was the leverage? Because there is no leverage unless there was someone else involved. And then, of course, we come back to who else would benefit from the Odessa theory being squashed. And it's not only academia who would be against the Odessa theory. Of course, the church would be. And remember, all of my early critics from when the book first came out were fundamentalist Mormons and fundamentalist Christians. Okay, they were in academia, but I wouldn't say they were just academics. They were very firmly, and from their comments, most pointedly, fundamentalist religious people, both Mormons and Christians. So is, a part of the church or the Mormon church also against the Odessa theory? It would be in their interest to quash it because it undermines all of classical Christianity. They've got this narrative of the Jesus that they want to portray as a pauper prince of peace. That's what they've been saying for the last 1700 years or so. That's where their power base relies, or resides, should I say. Because that's what they, that's how they earn their money, is by selling this idea of the pauper prince of peace. And you've got to believe in this guy. If this guy turns out to be part of a royal family, in fact, maybe the king himself, does that change the story sufficiently that things like the church could be undermined by that? If people started realizing that Jesus was a real king, not just a pretend king.
Were you the first commentator or writer to suggest that Jesus came from a royal family? Were you the first?
I think I probably was. I can't recall any other books that concentrated on Jesus being a real king, even though he's called a king on 36 occasions, within the New Testament, because nobody had managed to find a king who had been deleted from history. This was always the problem, and it was the problem I had when I first started this, 40 odd years ago, when I was still at school. More than 40 years ago now. Dear me, time rolls on. Anyway, the big problem was this guy was a king, and he looked like a king from the gospel story. It just seemed to me that this guy had the power and the influence of a royal person. But who on earth could that royal be? How could you have a king who is an important person who will be recorded in history, who has been deleted from history because we don't know who this king is? And for a long, long time, many decades, I could not find any monarch who could fit in with the gospel story. And so it's impossible. How can you say that Jesus was a real king if you cannot find that real king in the historical record? And then, of course, I found Odessa. And the story fitted perfectly. And so now I had my king. Now I could write my book, even though I've been writing all of these other books, going around the the skirts of this story. I was going all around the circumference of this story, but never going into the center because I had no idea where that center was. And finally, with the Odessa book, I could write about the very heart of this story, which is the Odessan royal family. Now, that idea is a big threat to the church, all of the Christian type churches. And so it would be in their interest to squash this particular theory. And it wouldn't cost them a great deal to do so. I mean, how much in terms of influence or money would it take to change a YouTuber's mind? It wouldn't take very much, would it? I mean, you've got to realize, people like Bedroom Barman. I call him Bedroom Barman because he records from his bedroom. He forgot to put the background up one day because he relies on these video backgrounds, and so it was just his bedroom. And Barman, you should listen to Jordan Peterson a bit more. The first thing you do is actually make your bed. It's number one in Jordan Peterson's 10 rules for life. Yeah, so make your bed next time. So when we can see it on the video, it looks as if it's made. Anyway, that's beside the point. The guy is obviously not flushed with a lot of money. How much money or influence would it take to change someone's mind? That's why I wanted to talk about COVID to start with. What sort of money would it take to change a scientist's mind? Well, we know the answer to that because we have the answer from Fauci. When Fauci wrote that, ordered this paper to be written, which was saying that it could not have come from a lab, it had to come from a wet market, and saying it came from a lab was a conspiracy. When that paper was written, I think there were 9 people on that particular paper, and they all changed their mind. So initially, they'd all been saying that the particular virus came from the lab. And then suddenly they all changed their mind and they all became signatories to this paper saying that was impossible. It had to come from a wet market. So what does it cost to make these 9 medics change their mind? Well, it turned out that later, because we got the information, it came out later, they all got $9 million in grants. So that's your price. It took $9 million in grants to fund their research programs that they were doing to change their minds. And they all changed their mind overnight. Okay, so coming back to Bedroom Barman, what would it take to change his mind overnight? Because remember, this is an overnight change. He was getting a GoFundMe for Dr. Price, and then he turned against him just 2 weeks later. What would it take to change his mind, I wonder? People, I think, should speculate on that. Yeah, since we've got the chat here, put it up in the chat. Let's have a look, see what you think. What would it take to change Bedroom Barman's mind? I don't think the change of mind was based on information, on research, on theological argument, on historical argument. I don't think that had anything to do with it myself. I think something else was involved. So what could have been involved, I wonder?
Yes, and thank you everyone for your comments today. There's been so many comments. I'm struggling to keep up with them, I've got to be honest.
It's going very fast,
yes,
isn't it?
it
I
is.
noticed
And,
that.
yes, I haven't done many lives before, and I've never had this many comments on the go. So it's been a challenge keeping up with Ralph and the comments at the same time. I'm just about managing it at the moment. Of course, I think it was the first person to cancel Price, Dr. Price, was Lambert, Derek at Myth Vision.
Yes.
And that was because Price referred to a violent criminal as a thug. which
Yes.
apparently, and I wasn't aware of this at the time, apparently has racial connotations, that phrase or that word in America. But in this country, a thug is just somebody who's a bit of a hooligan and gets involved in fights, is a bit violent or whatever, you know. It's got nothing to do whatsoever
Well,
with race.
more specific than that, a thug in this country was traditionally always a white working class football supporter with Doc Martin boots and cut jeans. That was a
Mm,
thug. Um, so if you want any racial connotations, it was always a white working class
mm.
person, always.
I can remember reading the
So yeah,
story when it came out. I can remember reading the story and looking at this, thinking, "What on earth is going on?" So Dr. Price has called this really violent criminal a thug, and now he's being censored and banned by these channels. And then I found out afterwards that apparently thug means something completely different in America. So, but I
yeah,
don't
but
think that Price was in any way. Oh,
they
go on, sorry.
well, they're so good at manipulating language that you never know if it is or not, because they will just change the language to suit the argument they
Mm,
want. Like, you know, forever and a day, we used to say colored, but now the language changed and you're not allowed to say that anymore. It has to be of color, although to me, it means exactly the same thing. Catch you saying the wrong words, so they change particular pieces of language to mean things that they never ever meant before, and it's done deliberately so they can catch you out. Especially someone of my age and era, when things that were commonplace only 20 years ago
mm,
are now completely taboo.
yeah.
And the idea is to trip people up,
Mm.
and it's done deliberately.
Yes,
And
that's
that was a trap, I'm sure, that they set for Dr. Price.
political correctness, isn't it? Can be used as a
Yeah,
weapon against you, basically. You know,
totally.
if you can't keep up with it all, and I mean, I'm nearly 48 now, and I'm struggling. You know, it's as you say, language is changing rapidly, and there are so many things now that
Yeah.
you can't say, and it's my I can I
Well,
tell
now you're not even allowed to say a woman is a woman. You get cancelled for that
yes,
now. Look,
and
I mean, look at the trouble that um, the Harry Potter lady got into with saying that.
yes,
Literally all she said is a woman is a woman,
mm,
and she got cancelled as well. So I
mm.
mean, that's the ultimate in manipulating language, so that what used to be common is now derogatory.
J.K. Rowling, yeah, I had.
J.K. Rowling, yes, that
Just a
lady.
very quick story. I had, well, I've got a relative basically that up until the pandemic was working at the Drury Lane Theatre in London, a very famous theatre in the West End in this country.
Mm.
And one day they were called into the office and they were given a written warning, and this had never happened before. But what's all this about, sort of thing, you know? Well, you've been accused of misgenderizing somebody. Um,
Right.
yeah, so another member of staff that worked there identified as something weird and wonderful or whatever. But the problem was, Ralph, that this person was changing their gender every single day. Now, how are you supposed to know how to refer to somebody if they change their gender every single day? And this is what my relative said, and yet they were given a written warning for this. I mean, it's just clown world.
Yeah, and again, that's done deliberately in order to, um, it's in order to defeat people, to give yourself a higher status within society. If you can bring your enemies down low, then you are promoting yourself. You are becoming dominant. And the easiest way nowadays to bring someone down to their knees is to say they've said something that is wrong.
Mm,
And so they do this deliberately in order to destroy their enemies, like destroying Dr. Price, like destroying myself, like destroying the Odessa gospel theory. So yeah, this is a deliberate tactic, especially in the age of information media sort of age,
Mm.
where a lot of this takes place online. You're not having an argument in a pub nowadays where you'd have to actually face the person that you're criticizing. Now you can do it online, and you can bring people down from a few sentences on a keyboard, and you can bring important, influential people down. Like David Starkey was brought to his knees because he said something that was wrong, and he got dismissed because 3 people complained or something,
Mm.
Same with J.K. Rowling, same with many people. And they're brought to their knees because one little person wants to make a complaint in order to make themselves sound important, and to bring someone who's influential down to their knees. It's
Mm.
part of the game, I think.
Yeah. We've had somebody
It's a bit
asking.
like pulling statues off plinths.
We've had somebody asking for your thoughts on Dr. Richard Carrier's work. Would you like to comment on that at all, Ralph?
Yes, I would. Let me see if I can pull up a little bit of information. Because, yeah, I've got no great love of Richard Carrier. I think he's a bit of a fraud myself. He purports to be such an influential and knowledgeable person on New Testament studies, but I'm not entirely sure he is. I've had some interactions with him. I had doubts over his Bayesian analysis of New Testament. He was deciding whether the New Testament was true or false based on Bayesian mathematics. Now, to me, you cannot determine a historical truth through mathematics. But even worse, you can't do it through Bayesian maths, because with Bayesian maths, you need a starting point. So you need a fundamental foundation upon which the calculation is made. And his basic calculation for the New Testament is that Jesus was an angel. And based on that foundation, the mathematics showed that the gospel story must be false. I think, hold on a minute. If your fundamental basis on which you've made this calculation is wrong, and Jesus was not an angel, if he was a real king instead, i.e. a king of Odessa, your entire calculation is utterly wrong. So, yeah, I disagreed with that, and we had a bit of an argument about that. But then he came out with some stupid, what I would say, basic stupid comments that I couldn't believe that someone in his position would make these mistakes. Now, he said, we were talking about gospel stories and so on, and Carrier said, and this is still online, you have to get it on the Wayback Machine nowadays, I think, but anyway, it was on his website that he used to run, which was called the Free Thought, I think, website, except you weren't allowed to have free thoughts. But apart from it, it was a great name for a website. He got kicked off there because of all those sexual accusations that people in the chat will know about. They can sit and chat.
Yes,
about
I've seen a few comments about that, Ralph. Were any of those accusations found to be true at all? Do you know?
Well,
Because
they went to court, so he got thrown off because of that from a couple of sites, and then he took them to court. And the trouble was with the court system, you can wrap people up in the court system for years and it cost them $250,000 to defend themselves. You know, the people who ran the website, in the meantime, I think Carrier was being funded by a white knight who we don't know who that person was, but his court fees were being funded by an independent personality. So again, we see the corruption of money flowing into the system, which can change people's minds, like it changed the minds of the people who were saying that, you know, the virus came from from a Chinese lab. Money does talk, and money can talk if, the church and various other people are throwing money around. And we've seen the possibilities there. But anyway, so Carrier had a white knight that was paying his costs, and he lost, and then he won on appeal, I think. And then the appeal went for another appeal, and I don't know what's happened after that. I'll have to search for that. But yeah, it was costing a lot of people, innocent people, a lot of money. All they wanted to do was take him off the site because he was very controversial with these accusations that were running around. And the way he dealt with those accusations, they didn't want to be a party of that. And that's why he was removed from that particular website. But anyway, I think it's still ongoing, all of that business. So yeah, but as a part of that, on this site, he said this to me. He said, no mention is made of any arms being taken onto the Mount of Olives. And you think, hold on a minute. He's supposed to be a New Testament scholar, isn't he? Jesus ordered for swords to be purchased in Luke 22:36, and they were delivered to Jesus in Luke 22:38. And they went onto the Mount of Olives in Luke 22:39. And those swords were used to cut off an ear in Luke 22:50. It's a continuous story. It's not disjointed elements. It's one story of swords being purchased, taken to the Mount of Olives, and used on the Mount of Olives. And Carrier didn't know anything about that. And what he didn't know to take that one step further is that Josephus Flavius tells the same story. The only difference being that Josephus Flavius said that the leader, who was the Egyptian false prophet, and we've talked about this guy being Jesus before, the Egyptian false prophet had an army of 30,000 people on the Mount of Olives. So it wasn't just a Bible story meeting or something. It was 30,000 armed men on the Mount of Olives. So there you go. That's why they had swords. So that's the full story. And Carrier didn't know anything about it. And then he said, this is Carrier again, doctor supposedly, Richard Carrier. He said, Jesus is not a high priest in any gospel narrative. And I really don't know what he can possibly mean about that, because Hebrews 7 details exactly how and why Jesus became the high priest. And it gives all the excuses as to how he could become a high priest, because he wasn't a Levite. And so he had to do it by election instead of hereditary, gaining the post through his family. So I'm not sure what he was talking about there, but he didn't know that Jesus was the high priest. And then he says there's no revolt in the Gospels. There is no mention of a revolt in the Gospels. And yet if you read Mark 15:7, it says, there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with them, who had made revolution with Jesus, who had committed murder in the revolution. Sorry, Carrier, why do you not know that this was a revolt? This was a revolution. How on earth can you put it in print? Because this was all on the internet. So, I've got the quotes. People can read it. Why does he not think there was a revolution during the New Testament era? And I say, of course, that revolution was the Jewish revolt, but that's a different matter. And then Carrier said that the only Jesus that the Talmudic rabbis knew about died before the Romans arrived in Judea. You think, has this guy never read the Talmud? He's supposed to be a New Testament scholar. Has he not read the Talmud? Because the Talmud mentions Jesus on numerous occasions, sometimes with pseudonyms like Balaam, like Kamsa, like Ben Pandira, and so on. which are all known. These are not my translations. These have all been known about for 100 years, that these are pseudonyms for the biblical Jesus. But I'm trying to think of the actual. There are a couple of occasions within the Talmud where he's actually called Yeshu the Nazarene. Well, that is quite obviously, and it's talking about Yeshu the Nazarene getting crucified. Yeshu the Nazarene just has to be the biblical Jesus. So why does Carrier not know about this? Which is, I find that very odd. I'm wondering if he's a bit of a pseudo scholar and not a real scholar. And then he said, and this one got me, because he's obviously not, this is the trouble with people like the Gormless Gnostic, who have an idea that they know something, and they are so convinced about their superiority that they will argue from a position of ignorance, like the Gormless Gnostic trying to tell me where Odessa is, and
failing miserably into the bargain.
Failing miserably, looking on the coast for Odessa. Why would someone have the misplaced confidence to think that they know better than someone who's done a lot of research on this topic? Well, Carrier did exactly the same, because it's pretty obvious that Richard Carrier has not investigated Arthurian legend. I mean, there's no good reason why he would do. But anyway, so we were talking about Arthurian legend a little bit, and he said, well, Arthurian legend is completely wrong because they have the wrong name for Vespasian. They call Titus Vespasian and Vespasian Titus. They have them reversed. And it's pretty obvious if you read Arthurian legend, they've got them round the as it were, the wrong way. And so he's saying that, Arthurian authors don't even know who is Vespasian and who is Titus. It's stupid, therefore it's all wrong. Well, he obviously doesn't realize that both father and son had the same name. They were both called Titus Flavius Vespasianus Augustus. And so the name you choose is a matter of convention. It's not a matter of fact. And it's quite obvious that the Arthurian authors just chose Titus for Vespasian, and they chose Vespasian for Titus. They just had an opposite convention to what we have in the modern world. But that doesn't make them wrong. What it makes is it makes Carrier wrong, yet again. Anyway, so that was some of the contentions I had with Richard Carrier, and I was hugely disappointed. Not that he wouldn't take on the Odessa theory, because that is obviously quite controversial, but that he didn't actually know the subject he was talking about. And this guy is supposed to be a New Testament scholar. And those are just basic errors that no one who is researching New Testament history should be making.
Yeah, very interesting. Ralph, if you don't mind, I'd like to finish today with just a few comments from people, because the comments have been coming in a crazy level. So this is one of my favorites so far. Jacob Berman versus Ralph Ellis is like a kid versus Mike Tyson in the ring. And I would have to go along with that one.
Well, just a quick comment on that. Well, yes, it should be. And this is something that Bedroom Barman should be taking into account. As you say, he's about 23 years old. What does he know? Why should he have the confidence to challenge someone so confidently who's been researching this for 45 years? Is that something they do in education nowadays? It seems very strange to me that he has no respect for the views, as it were, of an elder who might actually know one or two things about what he's talking about. Be a little bit more circumspect in his criticism, instead of being so forthright. It's something to think about.
Absolutely. Here's one from Carl Karsnak, and he said, normies don't have magicians, gold and spices brought to them at birth.
Yes, well, that's true.
Exactly, yeah, that's a very good point. My cursor is extremely sensitive with this chat. Let's have this one from Carl as well. They're all a clique. They'll cancel each other if they don't cancel Ralph first. YouTube religion nerds is a very small world. They need to support the hustle or it fails.
But as a further comment on that, what is the link that binds them together? Are they linked together laterally, or is there a higher power that is controlling those below? That's the interesting thing to think about.
We'll try and get one more up before we finish today. Bear with me one moment. Just here we go. Well, this is one from a fan of yours, Emil Mandrew, who's written some books, I think, and he said that Usus, a lost king, brings praises to Rallo about the theory of Odessa. Does that make any sense to you, Ralph?
No, I don't know a lost king called Usus. No,
I know.
I found one here actually. I can ask myself this. This is from AFD, and he says, "Can Ralph comment about the influence of Ahmed Osman, who has posited similar theories?" Yeah, Ahmed Osman, I'd recommend his books to anyone. He is one of the formative influences on my career. Because before I started writing, he wrote his Stranger in the Valley of the Kings, which was his analysis of the biblical Jacob, not Jacob, Joseph, the Old Testament Joseph, being Yuya, who was the patriarch of the Amana family of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And I think he is right on that. It's a very good book. So if anyone wants to read that, it's Stranger in the Valley of the Kings by Ahmed Osman. So yeah, I would recommend his books.
Brilliant. Here's one from Carl. It's very hard to convince a man of a thing when his livelihood depends on not understanding that thing. And that's from
Yes.
a quote from Upton Sinclair.
Well, and we've proved that with the medics who were paid $9 million to say, no, it didn't come from a Chinese lab.
We'll just do another one quickly before we finish today. This is from Emil as well. I presented the theory of Odessa in Romania on a famous podcast called Spectre. Well, there we are.
Yes, I saw that. I didn't understand it, of course, because it was all in Romanian. But good on him if he's promoting the theory over in Romania.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice place. I used to visit Romania quite a lot. We used to go to, where did we used to stay? Oh, we used to stay in Tiramisu, which apparently is not called tiramisu, but everyone called it tiramisu because it was an easy way of remembering it. So it wasn't a sweet delight. It was a very nice town, actually.
Yeah. So before we finish, Ralph, I'd just like to say, if I may speak on behalf of your many followers and supporters, we completely understand if somebody accuses you of racism, of something as disgusting as racism or sexism and all the things we've talked about today, you have to defend yourself. We completely understand that. Our only concern would be that this is acting as a distraction to your work. That's a concern. So we're hoping that we get another book out of you in the near future.
Yes, well, what I'm doing at present is I'm going to release another Shards of Illumination when I get enough information for that. So that's half completed. I'm doing a lot of work with my climate paper. I've not advertised it because I'm trying to keep them separate. Because if in climate you mention that I've been writing strange things about Jesus being a real king, unfortunately, people will try and cancel you for that. They'll say, what does this guy know about climate? He's writing strange things about Jesus being a king. So I have to keep them separate. But anyway, that's taken off quite well. And I've been doing I've got 25,000 views on a comment on my climate paper, which is important. Biden has just spent another $1.4 trillion on climate in his latest, what they called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a complete oxymoron. You can't spend $1.4 trillion and expect inflation to go down. Talk about gaslighting the population. It's got nothing to do with inflation. Most of that was money into renewables because of climate change, because of CO2, which is what I wrote about in my climate paper. The problem being, in my climate paper, there was no CO2 involved in the classical way that people say. So my climate paper goes against the orthodoxy as much as my New Testament research does. But that's been taking off recently. So I've been doing a lot of work about that. And I've got a few rebel scientists sort of looking at it at present who hadn't looked at it before. It's very difficult to get these pieces of information into the limelight, as it were, because, who am I screaming from the sidelines? And so a lot of people didn't know about it, even though I wrote this paper 6 years ago now, and it's had 45,000 views on the actual paper, which is a lot for a science paper. So that's been getting very popular, and I've been doing a lot of work on that. So we might have some interesting results on that later. But yeah, I'm still going with the religious research, doing an awful lot of these videos, which in a way is good, because the trouble is with being on a particular channel, you do get the same viewers come in all the time to that channel. So having been forced off the Gormalist Gnostics and mythicism and so on, I've been forced onto other channels, which gives you a completely new audience to talk to. So that's good. So that's been happening quite a lot. I've done.
Best of luck with that.
Yeah, I've done 5 in the last week of different talks and so
on.
Wow. So, as one door closes, another opens, so I get kicked off the Tired Old History channel. And I got invited onto another 2. And they only found out about myself because of all of this controversy going on. Oh, and by the way, dear bedroom barman, my book sales have doubled since since Bedroom Barman started all of this nonsense. Thank you, but book sales, I don't sell a great deal. I'm not a million seller. I only sell, book sales are running at something like a dozen a day or something. I mean, it's chicken feed in terms of top sellers, but it's okay. It's putting the information out there. And I have to say, of course, I have some books. Bedroom Barman has no books to his name. Neither does the Gormalist Gnostic. Neither does the moronic mythicist. None of them actually have any books or theories to their name. And yet they're putting themselves out there as authorities in this subject. They're not. If you want to listen to someone who has something interesting to say, listen to Dr. Price. Dare I say, even listen to some of the other sort of academics. But I've been disappointed with some of the other academics in the breadth of their ideas, because they're so orthodox. You look at people like Bart Ehrman, who's supposed to be sort of radical, but he's not. I think we went through this before. He started his first book that I read, and the first sentence in the book came straight out of the Catholic Church. It was a confession that Jesus was a real sort of, demigod sort of thing. And I think, hold on a minute, you're supposed to be researching this subject, not writing that Jesus is this, wonderful demigod sort of person. That was the very first sentence in the book. I made a post about that, so that'll be in my Shards of Illumination book. So yeah, I've been disappointed with some of the classical researchers, but there are some good researchers out there. So go and listen to them and see and make up your own minds. Really, is all we can do at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Ralph. The comments are still coming in. I've just put this one on the screen because it's something that really interests me. Have you looked into possible Jewish origins of the red-haired Tudors?
Yes, well, yes. Someone else said I was racist again. They keep saying you can't say anything in this world, as we were discussing about before. You were talking about, you only have to say that water is wet and someone will say that's racist. I've had a lot of this recently, talking about my ginger monarchy theory, and the moronic mythicist said that was racist on a video just last week. I was racist because I said that various people were ginger. Well, I'm sorry, they they were ginger. And so part of my research is about the ginger monarchy, and I've written about this. So again, it'll be in Shards of Illumination, about these various people being ginger. But one of the good ones that I came across recently was the famous redheads in history, which is a blog site which has just detailed the history of redheads throughout the ages. And I wonder if I have this lady up here. Famous redheads in history. Here it is. Lizzie Sidal is her name. She's Italian, and she started this because she's a redhead in Italy, of course. And you wouldn't think of Italians as being redheads, but why are there redheads in Italy? Well, because the king of southern Italy and Sicily used to be Roger the First, and he was a redhead, of course, because he was a Viking. They had a Viking king, was the king of Italy. And from there, we had all of these famous redheads in Italy. So they have spread far and wide. So the blog site is called Famous Redheads in History, and it follows these monarchs and all of the other aristocrats in history. And yes, the Tudors could have been descended from the Egyptian royal family if you follow the Scota Queen of the Scots story. So we know that Yuya and Thuyu were both ginger. They were the founders of the Amarna dynasty of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They are ginger. You can see them in the Cairo Museum. And it's a true ginger. It's not just henna. Scottish history, through Scotty Chronicon, says that their descendants went to Spain and Ireland and Scotland. And this is long before the Viking era. This is 1200 BC, a long, long time ago. So there is a route by which influential redheads could have reached Scotland and Scandinavia, if you take that as being a valid route for that phenotype to have arrived in that area. So, and it's from the Vikings, of course, that we get the Tudor monarchs. So the Vikings came down and they took over northern France and they became the Normans, the Northmen, and it was the Normans who invaded England under William the Conqueror. And it was William the Conqueror that seeded a lot of our royal family. And then you get the redheads from southern France, from Orange, which is where Mary Magdalene came in, if you believe those theories about Mary Magdalene. They came into southern France to Orange, and then it was Orange, the people of Orange, the Principality of Orange and the princes of Orange, who then moved to Holland to become the Dutch princes of Orange. And of course, they're all ginger as well. So yeah, there's many routes, and one of those princes of Orange, of course, became the King of England, William III. William III or William the First? I think it was. I can't remember now. Is he William the First?
Could have been a second. I don't know.
Anyway,
um,
William of Orange, he became the King of England in the 17th century. So yeah, there are many routes by which this ginger phenotype could have followed their way through into Northern Europe. So interesting story. Needs a whole book on it. I haven't written a book on that. I've got various mentions of it in various articles. But if someone like dear old Lizzie, who seems to like this, Lizzie Siddall, would like to write a book on it, I would recommend it. I'm sure it would sell well. There's a lot of interest in the ginger monarchy.
Definitely.
And it's not racist to say that various monarchs were ginger, because they were.
Scientifically proven in Ramesses II's case, I think,
Yeah.
wasn't it? So
yes, the mummy of Ramesses II was taken to Paris, and it was investigated by the French forensic scientist, and he said, "Yeah, it's true ginger."
Not up
So
for
yeah,
debate anymore. Yeah, Ralph, it's been a pleasure and an education as always. I hate to bring a stream to an end because I'm busting for a wee, but I'm afraid today that's what I've got to do. I want to thank everyone for your comments and your questions. It's been absolutely phenomenal. I need more subscribers. I'd like to do this a lot more with Ralph if I can twist his arm. I've really enjoyed it. I need to get up to 1,000 subscribers to be able to super chat. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. I think I'm on about 800 subscribers at the moment. So thank you, Ralph, for being with me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll hopefully be back very soon in the near future with another live and maybe a history Q&A as well.
Yes, and from myself as well, thank you for all of the interesting questions. It shows that there is an interest. People do have an interest, and they have some very interesting questions. It would be a good idea to actually concentrate on those questions a bit more and answer all of those, because it's very interesting topics coming up there.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon.